Welcome to a special edition of Meet the Press Now, live from the 2024 Republican National Convention. I am Kristen Welker here in Milwaukee as Republicans gear up for a second night of convention speeches with a focus tonight on crime and immigration. It comes after an opening night show of unity with the party standing behind former President Trump like we've never seen before. This was the scene last night, the former president's first public appearance since narrowly surviving an assassination attempt. He walked out onto the convention floor to a roaring crowd that chanted, "Fight, fight, fight." That was a callback to what he told supporters immediately after being shot. The former president looked noticeably emotional at times and more subdued than usual, his right ear bandaged as he stood next to his vice presidential pick for the first time. And from the stage, a rallying cry for Trump, now the official Republican nominee.
On Saturday, the devil came to Pennsylvania holding a rifle, but an American lion got back up on his feet and he roared.
I believe this year Virginia will elect another Republican outside businessman as President of the United States.
President Trump is a candidate who is not afraid of hearing from new, loud, and often critical voices. And I think we all can agree, whether people like him or they don't like him, in light of what happened to him on Saturday, he has proven to be one tough SOB.
Well, tonight the speaker lineup includes former Trump rivals like Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, who clashed with Mr. Trump on the campaign trail this year, as well as some former 2016 rivals like Marco Rubio and Senator Ted Cruz. Moments ago, vice presidential nominee JD Vance was on the stage for a technical walkthrough ahead of his expected address tomorrow night. The former president's pick of Vance is perhaps the best example of his strong grip over the Republican Party and its future. Mr. Trump has tapped a potential MAGA successor in his image, despite Vance being largely untested, having only served in the Senate for a year and a half. It all comes as the former president and his team are signaling a shift in message and tone at this convention. Here was his son, Eric Trump, speaking to my colleague, Savannah Guthrie, about the need to turn down the temperature in our politics.
This cannot happen in this country. I mean, we're the best country on earth. This cannot happen in any way, shape, or form. And it gives a whole different perspective to life and frankly, the whole, political narrative among the media and among people and among politics. It's got to get toned down.
Now, the former president's call for unity comes amid a dangerously volatile political environment that in many ways Mr. Trump has helped shape with incendiary rhetoric and promises of retribution and revenge. NBC News correspondent Garrett Hake is on the convention floor, and NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd joins me once again live on set. Garrett, let me start with you. You're down there on the floor. Tonight, we are expecting the theme to be Make America Safe once again. Speakers are going to talk about crime and immigration. And of course, this comes as everyone here is saying they're aiming to have a more unified message. Are the two things inconsistent? What will you be watching for?
I think the party's going to try to thread a very small needle here with a unifying message, even if the tone is a little dark for some people. They just showed, and you can still see some of it on the screen here, some of the imagery that people are going to be seeing tonight. You've got dirty needles, you've got trash on the streets, you've got piles of drugs. I mean, the idea here of America as kind of a crime-ridden place. There are other images that we were just seeing of immigrants being arrested at the border, migrants being arrested at the border. I think you're going to see a lot of these speakers tonight paint a pretty dark image and then offer Donald Trump as a solution to it. And the unity, I think, is important to keep in mind, the way Donald Trump works. The unity is unity on Donald Trump's terms. The speakers who are coming tonight are Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, whom you've mentioned, are people who have bent the knee. They have pulled out of the race. They have endorsed him. Nikki Haley, of course, making it a big point when she dropped out to say it's incumbent upon Trump to go get her voters. Donald Trump has done none of that. And so Nikki Haley is still here tonight on Donald Trump's terms. So if you think about unity, if you unify around Trump, I think that's a way to look at the way these speakers are going to present their message tonight, which I think will be a little bit about frightening people into the Trump camp with some of the imagery and some of the tone that we're going to hear.
Well, and fear has always been to some extent, going back to 2016, a part of Trump's messaging. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out tonight. Garrett, let me follow up with you because, of course, all eyes will be on Nikki Haley when she takes the podium. It wasn't clear she was going to speak to the convention. Well, she is going to move forward with speaking. Talk a little bit about what you're expecting specifically from her tonight. And, of course, that all-important question, what will her voters do? They could be the ones who ultimately decide this close race.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I talked to Eric Trump about this earlier today, and he was pretty confident what we wouldn't see from Nikki Haley, that we would not see her do the kind of Ted Cruz heel turn that we saw in 2016, where Cruz, who had been Donald Trump's primary rival in that race, pointedly did not endorse him at the end of his convention speech. They do think they'll get a much more team player in Nikki Haley on stage tonight. But as I was just alluding to, it has been largely up to Nikki Haley to convince Nikki Haley's Republican voters to get back into the Donald Trump tent. Nothing we have seen from Donald Trump since Nikki Haley dropped out in the primary process indicates that either he or the Trump campaign see her voters, you know, in many cases more affluent or more liberal-leaning Republican voters, the Northeastern Republican of years past. They've never seen or behaved as though they believed those people were important to the Trump coalition. They're important to Nikki Haley. Perhaps her endorsement here on stage in a larger venue might push them back towards Donald Trump. But if that's the case, they're going to be pushed to Donald Trump by, you know, fear and by their distaste for the Biden administration. They will not be pulled into the Donald Trump camp by Donald Trump.
Well, Garrett, your call back to Ted Cruz sets me up perfectly for my conversation with Chuck Todd. Thank you so much for that. Chuck, let's start right there. 2016 versus now. It couldn't be a starker difference. In 2016, this party was divided. Not last night. This was Donald Trump's party. It's clear of that. Not only is it his party, but he's thinking about who he's going to pass the torch on to in this vice presidential pick.
Look, it's clear at this convention, this is Trump's party. You know, I was talking with Steve Hayes about this for a longer conversation that we had for my podcast that'll be out tomorrow. And it's not as if the Reagan wing still doesn't exist. There's Governor Brian Kemp. Nikki Haley, in theory, is from there. Marco Rubio still sort of more as a creature of that wing. Doug Burgum arguably is a creature of that wing. So there are still members of that wing of the party that are around, but to use Garrett's phrase, they're here on Trump's terms. Yeah. They are not here to defend sort of small government. This is not a party that believes in small. Donald Trump's party doesn't believe in small government. They believe in strong government, right? So that part of it is remarkable, but there is still a vibrant. It's not as if the actual rank and file Republican Party. There's still a version that this sort of chamber of commerce, the people that voted for Nikki Haley, the management class, whatever you want to refer to them, who are homeless now. And nothing that was said last night appealed to them. Not at all. You know, these are folks that joined the Republican Party to fight the Teamsters Union, not to cheer the Teamsters Union. It's remarkable, but if you're looking at a historical context, we are seeing Donald Trump is essentially bringing the Republican Party back to the 1920s and 30s when it was a very protectionist party and an isolationist party.
Well, and that's why the pick, of course, right, and that's why the pick of JD Vance as his running mate is so fascinating because, of course, he is isolationist in his worldview, and you have made the argument that Trump made that pick from a position of strength. Talk a little bit about what.
Well, look, there were different people in his ears telling him, hey, you don't have this election done. And if you don't think this is over, you probably should think about a Marco Rubio. Or maybe you should think about a Doug Burgum if you think you need to bring the party together still. But that isn't what he thinks, right? He thinks he's got this thing. And, you know, that's what's remarkable about this entire convention. You can feel the energy. This is I didn't know what to expect after Saturday, what the atmosphere would be here, but this is not what I would have predicted.
In what sense?
It is almost like it's a celebration. Yeah. It's festive.
More celebratory than you would
much more than you thought, and it's almost as if they see, well, it's divine intervention, and he's destined to be president, and that creates almost an extra aura of unity here. And I think you'll see, I'm going to guess that DeSantis and Haley sort of fall for the crowd and what they want and feed them what they want here. I'm not saying that's where the whole party is, but that's what's going on here. And I can't help but contrast that. I can't imagine a Democratic National Convention having the same feel about Joe Biden as this group does have and their feelings about Donald Trump.
I keep thinking that. What is the Democratic National Convention going to feel like in contrast to this? Okay, stay right here, Chuck. We have a lot more to discuss, but I want to pause our conversation for just a moment to turn to the governor of the great state of New Hampshire, Kristen Sununu. Governor Sununu, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
So Chuck and I are just talking about Donald Trump's decision to pick Senator JD Vance as his running mate. I want to get your reaction to this. Do you see this as a pick that is purely aimed at building the MAGA brand for the future, or do you think there are potentially electoral implications in Vance?
Well, he's a good pick. There's no doubt about it. I think the clarity is in the contrast between J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris. I mean, that's what you're really looking at when you're comparing the two vice presidents. So you look at everything from his upbringing. He's a Marine. He's incredibly smart. I mean, they wrote a book and made a movie about his life before he was even in the U.S. Senate. And most importantly, yes, he's a senator, but he's only been there about a year and a half. He's still an outsider, right? And that's what I think a lot of folks, the Republican Party and a lot of folks in America want. They want an outsider to come in and kind of bring some disruption to this establishment in Washington, D.C. that just isn't listening to the individuals of this country. And so, you know, in that aspect, I think the former president has picked a great running mate in J.D. Vance. He has that contrast. He's incredibly smart. He's got those leadership skills. There's no question about that. And it's not about supporting the MAGA brand or this. It's not about brand. Guys, you said it yourselves. This convention is all about unity. Everyone's getting on board, not just on the presidential side, but up and down the ballot in state races and congressional races and Senate races. All the polls say right now the unification of the Republican Party is going to be very successful come November. And then, of course, as you just brought up, the contrast to the disarray in the Democrat Party right now couldn't be more stark. I mean, most Democrats want the president off the ticket, right? Leadership in the Democrat Party wants him off the ticket. That battle is going to go on right up until the point of the convention. And even if they nominate Joe Biden, it's not going to be with a whole lot of enthusiasm. We all know that.
Well, Governor, just to be clear, leadership hasn't said they want him off the ticket. And I think it's an open question still what the Democratic National Convention will look like. But there's no doubt there has been a debate inside the Democratic Party. But let me ask you about some of the divisions within the Republican Party. One of them is on the issue of Ukraine. And on that point, Senator J.D. Vance takes an isolationist view, very similar, very in line with former President Trump. I want to read something you wrote about the war in Ukraine. This was last year. You wrote, quote, "To abandon Ukraine would set off a negative chain of events for U.S. interests domestically and abroad. Vladimir Putin is knocking at NATO's doorstep, and without our support and the support of our European allies, Ukraine will fall, resulting in far graver problems for the United States, conflict across Europe." Are you concerned that there is going to be an isolationist ticket representing the Republican Party?
No, look, I stand by those words very strongly. I really do believe the battle for Western democracy is right on the front lines in Ukraine, and we have to be very supportive. A lot of Republicans in the Senate and the House supported that bill to make sure those funds move forward. Look, you're never going to find us all agree on every issue, and you know what? That's okay. That's what makes us, I think, a very strong party as Republicans. You know, you have your conservatives and your moderates. You have those that want big government and small government and all this, but that's all right. Fundamentally, we're always about the individual. We're always about creating more opportunity, not just these big government solutions. So at the end of the day, yeah, we might differ on some of the policies here, but everyone's coming together. They really are, because an election is about choices. It's Biden or Trump. That's it. And when you go into the voting booth, you don't have a debate, right? You got to pick one or the other, and the Trump Vance ticket is going to be far and away much more strong and much more to the ideals of someone like myself and conservatives that want to see this country move in a better direction.
But Governor, and I do have a lot of questions, so just quickly, I mean, you paint this as an existential threat, Putin's invasion of Ukraine, to global security, to Western democracies. I mean, do you have reservations about the fact that the Republican Party may retreat from what you have laid out as its responsibilities?
No, because look, they're not saying we're abandoning the issue of Ukraine and Russia. They're saying they're going to have their own strategies to go about it. And they're going to work with their allies. They talk a lot about NATO, and I think they're right. You have to hold NATO accountable, and they have to move forward. So again, we're cutting into some of the nuances of how to make sure that Western democracy is secured and America's place in the world is secured, because a strong America means world peace. So we can have slightly different ways of going about it, but at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that we're going to abandon the ticket, right? We're going to abandon what's important, which is getting rid of this establishment, elite liberal establishment out of Washington, D.C., that frankly all of America has just had enough with.
Governor, you, of course, supported Nikki Haley during the primary. She is going to address the convention tonight. I guess the question is, she has said Donald Trump needs to earn the support of her supporters. Donald Trump has said, we don't really need him. Do you think he's done anything beyond inviting Nikki Haley to speak tonight to reach out and try to win over her supporters?
Oh, yeah. Look, again, it's not just about having one statement or making one overture. The unification of the Republican Party right now is unquestionable. And that goes from Nikki Haley supporters and Ron DeSantis supporters and Doug Burgum supporters and Donald Trump supporters. Everyone's getting behind the ticket. I think Nikki's going to be phenomenal on the stage tonight. I think she's going to show that unity. And at the end of the day, well, again, you have your primaries and you battle it out, and those can be very tough and they can get nasty sometimes, of course. But to have Nikki and and a lot of the other folks who ran against Donald Trump on that stage showing that support, it's very meaningful. There's no question about it. And it's just going to really solidify things over the next 3 days and show America it isn't just about MAGA base and all this sort of thing and one issue. It's about a party that wants to talk to the American people, more important, listen, as opposed to just standing on the shoulders of the families that built this country and keep telling them how to live their lives like the Biden administration is doing. People are really tired of that.
Governor, former President Trump has said that he's rewriting his speech in the wake of the assassination attempt against his life. He said it's going to be a more unifying message. He, of course, has a history of using heated, his critics would say very violent political language. Do you think he can be a sincere messenger in this space? What are you anticipating?
Well, if there's anything about Donald Trump, he means what he says, right? You can disagree with him all day long, but I mean, he talks off the cuff and extemporaneously more than anyone I've ever seen on a political stump speech. So the fact that he's willing to say, look, I have a different message. I see a different vision. I'm seeing things a little bit differently. And I think there's a different opportunity for his words, not just tonight, but over the next 4 months, to bring not just the Republican Party together. We've done that. He's done that. It's really about bringing this entire country to think more positive and hopeful. Again, it's all about that contrast, and the contrast to the Democrat Party right now, it's a nightmare over there. And you know what? It's their own fault. The Democrat Party, the elitists, the leadership, they all created this. They didn't want to talk about the border. They didn't want to talk about inflation. They didn't want to talk about crime and lawlessness and the homelessness crisis in their cities. And that's what Republicans want to do. We want to bring ideas and solutions and those things to the table, and that actually unifies people together. Right? Talking about the things that the American public wants us to talk about is a unifying opportunity, as opposed to just saying Donald Trump is a threat to democracy and all this sort of thing. People are tired of that.
Governor, let me just push back a little bit, because you're saying they don't want to talk about these issues. President Biden has actually spent quite a lot of time talking about issues from immigration to inflation, the border. In fact, there was a bipartisan deal coming together to deal with the issue of migration and the large numbers of people coming here illegally, and it was torpedoed by former President Trump, right? So can you actually say that they're not talking about this in Washington?
Once again, the Democrats are doing what they do best. Lots of talk, no action. What have they done? See, the border crisis got bad when Joe Biden signed 16 executive orders, completely changed the policies, and let everybody in. It turned out to be a disaster, as a lot of us on this side knew it would be. He tried to flip as fast as he could, but there was no law passed. No laws have been passed on the border for quite some time now. You want to put one bill after 3 years of realizing your policy's horrible, throw it on the House and say, well, if you don't vote for it, I guess this is your problem. No one's buying that. And if anybody was, then Joe Biden would be winning this election. What has he done to deal with inflation? He barely talks about it. He tells everyone that Bidenomics is working for them. Yet we have the highest credit card debt in this country. People can barely afford to pay their rent, and they can barely afford to put food on the table, but Bidenomics is working. So do not say that this administration has talked about issues. They've done nothing. And at the end of the day, with all the trouble and all the issues you might not like about Donald Trump, how he talks or how bombastic he can be, people want results. And that's a good thing. That means America is listening, and they're going to vote for change in November.
We should note that border crossings are down by 40% since President Biden signed a set of executive actions, and inflation is down as well. Governor
After being up 300%.
Thank you.
After being
Governor
up 300%, come on.
Right, but it is down at a new low, so appreciate it. Governor Sununu, thank you so much. Really appreciate your joining us on a very busy week. Let's bring Chuck back. For reaction, you hear the rhetoric we are hearing from the governor, not a surprise. Tonight's going to be filled with people drawing that contrast on immigration, on the economy. They're going to be talking about inflation. That's what they see as one of their biggest cudgels in this election.
Well, look, I mean, in that sense, where I agree with the governor is that they're talking about issues that do unify the broadest cross-section of Republicans you can find. He's not highlighting the massive divide there is on Ukraine. And it's a huge divide on Ukraine. Right. He's going out of his way not to do those things. He's not advertising the tariffs. I mean, I sort of joke, he's going to, if these tariffs go into place, Donald Trump's going to turn the dollar store into the $10 store because that's where all these tariffs and it isn't going to be China paying. It is going to be people that go to the dollar store paying these tariffs. But they're also not talking about that because, that is something that still makes half this party uncomfortable. It was remarkable to me to see Chip Roy comment, okay, the pandering was nice last night. I hope we can get to some small government conservatism for the rest of this convention. I'm misquoting, sort of paraphrasing him. If you're trying to say I'm misquoting him, but essentially that was the spirit with that. And that to me is what's so remarkable and that's what's going on here. The party, I mean, the fact of the matter is this party is more unified, this convention, since 2004. That was the 9/11 convention. That was the 9/11 re-election for George W. Bush. That was the last time the Republican Party was in this lockstep with each other. And look, nobody, Sununu included, you, me, none of us thought Donald Trump would unify this party like that.
Sure.
In some ways, he's purged the party of any critics, and that helps create unity if you get rid of people that don't agree with you.
Well, within that space, what are you expecting to hear from Nikki Haley? And will her message, I mean, we're anticipating she's going to talk about being a Trump convert, similar to some of the speeches we heard last night. But will that help to win over
I'm curious if she's running for president in 2028.
And if we hear any sign of that, if any
that's exactly
nugget of that,
right.
yes.
If she's basically finding a way to agree with Donald Trump without sort of talking about her own brand. I mean, this is somebody that wanted both candidates to take cognitive tests. This is somebody who thought anybody over the age of 75 maybe ought to be aged out of the federal government, right? So this is somebody who I think believes she has a lot more expertise on the world stage and better judgment than Donald Trump does on the world stage, or she said that during the primary. So that's what I'm looking for. Is she at all got a nod to 28, or is she somebody looking for a job in the Trump administration?
Boy, that would be something if she went back to the Trump administration.
She went to him once.
Served as his former UN ambassador.
Remember, she endorsed Rubio.
Yes, right.
But I've always said the reason she got that job is because Donald Trump wanted to do a favor to the lieutenant governor in South Carolina and make him governor. And so she benefited from the fact that Henry McMaster had earned a chit with Donald Trump.
So bottom line, you don't anticipate this speech to necessarily be one that reaches out to her voters and brings them into the Trump tent?
Look, I think she will go out of her way to sound like Kristen Welker did. More agreeable to Trumpism than he did 6 months ago when he was helping to run against Trumpism. He was more aggressive against Trumpism. Look, he made the turn. Look, if you believe that Donald Trump is the future of the Republican Party and you've decided to stay a Republican, you're falling in line. And you can see the lawmakers that have made that decision.
Yeah.
That is what it is.
All right. Chuck Todd, thank you.
You got
for
it.
Perspective, as always, in setting us up for another very momentous evening here. We want to turn now to the backdrop to all of this, the investigation into Saturday's assassination attempt of Donald Trump in Pennsylvania, with the Secret Service facing mounting scrutiny. An official telling NBC News that local police warned the Secret Service they were looking for a suspicious person at the rally. 4 officials tell NBC News that rallygoers alerted police after noticing Thomas Crooks pacing and acting strangely near the magnetometers. Police began pursuing Crooks on foot, but it's not clear when the Secret Service was notified. Meanwhile, in her first interview since Saturday's incident, the director of the Secret Service said she will not be stepping down and explained why there were no agents on that roof where the gunman was perched.
Should that roof have been secure, period?
That building in particular has a sloped roof at its highest point. And so, you know, there's a safety factor that would be considered there, that we wouldn't want to put somebody up on a sloped roof. And so, you know, the decision was made to secure the building from inside.
NBC News law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter joins me now. Tom, you're reporting on this, and frankly, every breaking story today has been remarkable. Does the Secret Service director's explanation about the roof that you heard there, and it's so fascinating to hear her talk about it, does it make sense from a tactical standpoint?
It doesn't make a lot of sense, according to people that I've talked with that are familiar with these type of tactics and what you would do there. There are some considerations from time to time about temperature and weather. That's a different one, but the Secret Service is used to being on top of roofs. They do it all the time. They have to do it all the time. Look at the counter sniper team that took out the shooter, Thomas Matthew Crooks. So I think her explanation, at least among law enforcement experts, doesn't hold water. Perhaps she knows something I don't. Certainly can concede that, depending upon what they found during their walkthrough, if it was an issue with respect to handling the load of somebody being on the roof. But then again, she didn't say that. So I think there's some questions there. I think there's been some really terrific additional reporting today by our colleague Stephanie Gosk, who spoke with the Butler Township manager. This is the person who oversees that township and the police department there. And so in the course of that, he described a scenario where local law enforcement officers, police, became aware that he was up, or somebody was up on that roof. 4 officers responded to that building we were looking at just a moment ago. They hoist up and push up one of their officers who, when he looks over the top of the roof, he sees Crooks there. Crooks turns and moves his rifle towards where the officer is. He's got both hands hanging onto the edge of the roof. He drops down. He falls 8 feet. And this, according to the township manager, they say that they get on the radio, apparently a shared radio frequency for this event, the security frequency for this event, and say, hey, we've got this guy up there. He's got a gun. That is a huge revelation today. And so the question is, did that information go out wider? Was the Secret Service aware of it? Were the Secret Service agents and the team that was up at the podium with former President Trump or the counter sniper team? You know, you see them move their rifle in advance. He's already looking over there when the shots are fired. You're looking right there on the video. It's perfectly explained. So were they given a heads up and they just didn't see it in time? There's a whole bunch of questions, of course, that we have. Every day brings more of them. We are trying to get answers. I get a lot of people on Twitter saying, why aren't you guys asking about this? We are asking about that. We're trying to bring you the answers as we get them. But it's certainly a focus of ours and obviously raises more questions about the overall plan that was put into play here, given the fact that the officers were there as they had said that they were planning to be.
Tom, it really, I know you're asking every question out there. It is just so remarkable to hear the Secret Service director point the finger at the local authorities. But I know you are bringing us every new detail as you get it. Let me ask you about another new development today. U.S. officials confirming that the Secret Service was actually focused on a separate threat against Donald Trump. What was the nature of that threat? What's the significance here?
So this came in the last several weeks to a month ago. The U.S. received information that there was a potential Iranian plot involving former President Trump. And I want to say from the outset, there is no indication at this time that Thomas Matthew Crooks, the shooter who fired rounds at the stage in Nick Trump in some way on Saturday, there's no indication that he has a connection to what I'm about to describe. So for some time, Kristen, and this has gone over the past couple of years, Iran has a list, for lack of a better phrase, of all sorts of people they would like to target in the United States. And it reads as a who's who of the Trump administration Iranian hawks. So like Mike Pompeo, Bolton, for instance, all of those individuals have been targeted. There's also some high-profile members of the Jewish community here in the U.S. that are on that list. And we've reported about this. Many other news organizations have reported on it in the past. Apparently, there was new information that came in that was a little bit more focused on former President Trump. So the Secret Service said at that time, this is before the rally on Saturday, that they beefed up their presence a little bit just because of what they were getting in the threat stream, even if it wasn't something that was totally vetted yet, not quite sure how serious the threat was. So I think what you saw on Saturday is apparently enhanced security, and then I think that might raise more questions.
Well, Tom, you've been on double duty today because I have to ask you about more breaking news, which is that Senator Bob Menendez was convicted on all counts, 16, I believe, in his corruption trial. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer now calling on him to resign, to step down. What comes next for the New Jersey Democrat?
Yeah, Congressman Booker, and you can add New Jersey's Governor Murphy to that list as well, among many other members of Congress who are vocally and forcefully calling for the resignation of the senator. When he spoke here earlier today, you see him at the podium, he gave no indication whatsoever that he was going to step down. He was defiant, frankly, in the result of the jury's verdict today. Look, it was 16-0 against the senator, 18-0 on the indictment. This was a total rebuke of his arguments and the defense that they laid out, and a complete belief in the prosecutor's theory. And I think we have to consider, we've talked about the gold bars and the cash because obviously we see those images, it's top of mind, or the idea that Menendez says it was his wife that was really the person responsible for this cash flow, and she was the one that was perhaps more involved in the scheme. His attorneys even painting the senator as a victim. You look at the conduct that the jury bought in this, that a sitting United States senator, then the chair of the powerful Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the jury says was providing confidential information to Egypt and assisting Qatar, not his constituents in New Jersey or in the United States. And so I think that's something that is perhaps noteworthy.
All right. Tom Winters covering literally every single story for us. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. We sure do. I know you've got a big team. You guys have been doing great work. And we've got much more coming up live from the Republican National Convention. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine will join me to talk about his home state senator becoming the VP nominee and what it means for the future of the Republican Party. You're watching Meet the Press Now special coverage of the Republican National Convention. Stay with us. And welcome back with Ohio Senator JD Vance, officially now the Republican vice presidential nominee. Ohio's Republican Governor Mike DeWine will be the one to choose his replacement if the Trump ticket wins in November. It comes as Ohio Republicans look to flip Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown's seat this fall, with candidate Bernie Moreno slated to speak tonight, along with other Republican Senate hopefuls. Ohio Governor DeWine will be here in just a moment. But first, joining me now is our fantastic panel, Matt Gorman, former senior communications advisor to the Tim Scott campaign, and Mark Lauder, director of strategic communications for Donald Trump's 2020 campaign. Thanks to both of you for being here. Really appreciate it. Of course. I want to get to tonight, but I have to start with your reaction to last night. Mark, when former President Trump walked out with his ear bandaged, that moment, that look on his face that was emotional, it was frankly a Donald Trump that I think we really haven't seen. What did you make of it?
Someone who came about a millimeter away from not being here tonight. I think it was really an awakening moment. And I think then the crowd was overwhelmed by that moment as well, and the support. It was very loud. I figured we were all going to need our earplugs when he walked out, and it's probably just a fraction of what we're going to see Thursday night.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. You know, Matt, we've been talking about the contrast between this convention and the last in-person convention, which took place in 2016, when the party was not unified in this same way around Donald Trump. What do you make of this moment, the fact that this has become Donald Trump's party, so much so that his running mate is basically seen as the future of the MAGA movement?
I mean, you're absolutely right. When we did this in 2016, the party was really tearing itself apart a little bit. I will say now it is easier than it's ever been, especially in these last 2 months or so, to be a Donald Trump supporter. And I think part of that tone was set. Unlike 2016, where the primary was a little bit mashed up, he was kind of a clown car primary, he had a one-on-one race. And that other contestant we saw later tonight in Nikki Haley, and he won it. So this really is his party, and the top-down control over the messaging, the speakers, so much more organized than we saw in 2016.
Let's talk about the messaging. They're going to be talking about crime and immigration at a time when Donald Trump has said he's rewriting his speech to deliver a unity message. Is the theme of immigration and crime discordant with a unity message? There's undoubtedly going to be some tough stuff that's uttered tonight.
I don't believe so, because look, if you look at the polls, immigration and crime do pop as issues that really our voters truly care about. And you look at folks, DeSantis and Haley tonight speaking, they're trying to get people who might have voted for them in the primary into the Trump tent, onto their side in the general election. I think that will be a huge factor.
Mark, when you think about the rhetoric and where we are right now in our politics, former President Trump has been a big part of that. I want to play a little bit of some of his past rhetoric for my viewers and get your reaction to what you're expecting on Thursday.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
When they let, I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country, when they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. Crooked Joe Biden is the demented tyrant. He's a demented tyrant who is trying to destroy our democracy. He's only good at cheating on elections, but it's not him. He's surrounded by fascists around the Oval Office. Just so bad in so many ways. He's killing our country.
So, Mark, when you hear that, and you also hear him say he's rewriting his speech on Thursday, can he make a pivot away from all of that rhetoric that he is known for?
Well, I think he can, though, because on the policy, I do think he's right on the policy that we need to secure our borders. We need to deal with illegal immigration. We need to be tough on crime, support law enforcement. So how we communicate that, I think, is obviously going to be a very important message. And I also think, though, that we've got to take lessons on the other side as well. You know, let's have a policy debate. Let's have a policy disagreement on both sides, but let's drop the name calling, the comparisons to Hitler, and and folks are dangerous, and realize we're still all neighbors, we're still all Americans, and we'll agree to disagree, and we'll do it politely.
I interviewed Senator Bernie Sanders over the weekend on Meet the Press, and he said we've got to get back to a place where our politics is boring. Can the country do that, Matt? Is it possible?
I hope so. Everything is so politicized now, from the TV shows we watch to the businesses we solicit and all that. It pervades every aspect of American life, and it can only go on for so long. And what we saw on Saturday was a terrible reminder of that. I'm hoping we can dial it back a little bit, at least in the short term. We've seen some evidence of that with the Biden campaign and also with the Trump campaign. In the long term, we'll see. I'm hopeful, but you never know.
Quick question for both of you. Obviously, the nominee or the pick of JD Vance as the vice presidential nominee. Is this just a pick to be the standard bearer of the future of the MAGA movement, or does he help electorally, Matt? What do you think?
This is a double down on the 3 states in the Rust Belt that are so important. I think they feel far more confident in the Sun Belt. That would have been a Rubio pick or a Tim Scott pick. Vance is really focusing on those 3 states and him to win them.
Mark, what do you think?
I don't think there's a better candidate out there that can go to an undecided voter and go, hey, I was just like you. I had my questions. I maybe had voiced some concerns. But when I looked at the records of these 2 men, the policies, their vision for the future, I made the choice to come on over. Come on in, join me. The water's fine.
All right. Great conversation. Mark Lauder, Matt Gorman. Thank you both so much. Great to see you. I'm sure we'll be talking a lot this week. And now joining me here on set is the governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine. Governor, thank you so much for being here.
Good to be with you.
Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you. It's the perfect segue to start our conversation. Obviously, former President Trump's running mate, JD Vance, hails from the great state of Ohio. Your reaction to this pick? Was he your first choice?
Well, it was a great day for Ohio. You know, it's been since 1944, John Bricker, vice presidential candidate with Dewey. So it's been a long time, 80 years. We're very happy. It's a good day for Ohio. It's always going to be good to have someone in the White House from Ohio.
I have to ask you the same question I was just talking to Mark and Matt about. There is skepticism inside the Republican Party that J.D. Vance will expand the Republican tent. In other words, he's seen as someone who really is doubling down on being Donald Trump, on the MAGA movement. How do you think he helps electorally? How does he help to bring in new voters?
First of all, J.D. Vance, I've known him for some time. After he wrote his book, I reached out to him. I thought it was fascinating. So we got to know each other. He's been to our home for dinner, he and Usha. So, you know, he's, first of all, an extremely intelligent person. You know, his life story, as has been pointed out many times, he can relate to about anybody. He can relate to a mom who doesn't have enough food. He can relate to a family who's got someone who's got a mental health problem or addiction problem. That's helpful politically, but it's also, I think, going to be helpful when he is vice president. Going through trauma yourself, seeing your family go through trauma, it just makes you a different person. The other thing I think you're going to see with J.D. Vance is he will continue to learn as we all do through life, and he will continue, I think, to evolve in some ways. But yes, the president made a decision to put someone on the ticket who is very similar to him in positions. There's no doubt about that. But you know, some of these debates are going to continue very much. The issue about Ukraine. Look, I feel very strongly that we have it. It is in our national interest to protect Ukraine, to give them the support that they need. And NATO is very, very important. So there's divergence of views in the Republican Party.
Let me follow up with you. You bring me to my next point perfectly, Governor. Let me follow up with you. I was talking to Governor Sununu about this very same point. He sees it as an existential threat that Putin has invaded Ukraine to the surrounding countries in Europe and, frankly, to democracies. Does it concern you that the entire Republican ticket takes a rather isolationist view as it relates to intervening and sending more aid to Ukraine?
Well, I'm not sure we know exactly what President Trump will do in regard to Ukraine. The vice presidential nominee has made it pretty clear where he is, but ultimately this is a decision made by the president. And when someone gets back in this case, back in the Oval Office and starts getting the briefings and looking at things. So I think this is still a very open question. We still certainly have many people in the United States Congress who feel we absolutely must help Ukraine. Not only is it the right thing morally to do, but it's in our national self-interest. A strong NATO is in our national self-interest. So this debate and conversation, let's say, will continue to go on.
Well, and former President Trump has said he can end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. When he makes those types of statements, do you believe him or do you think that that's wishful thinking?
Well, we'll see what happens when he takes office. Again, once you're back into the office, you know, we'll see. But we can only hope that, you know, he will see the wisdom of helping Ukraine. It's just vitally important to us.
Well, you talk about tough decisions. You've got a tough one ahead of you if they are to win the White House.
It's a pretty pleasant decision to have, actually. So.
Well, yeah, that's a fair point. Have you started to think about if they were to win, if they were to go to the White House, who would replace Senator J.D. Vance?
Sure. I mean, once it started looking the last few weeks that Vance would be the nominee, you know, if I told you I wasn't thinking about it, you wouldn't believe me anyway. So certainly I'm thinking about it. We got a lot of good people. Our focus now is getting Bernie Moreno elected to the United States Senate. We have 3 Supreme Court justices in Ohio to get elected. We've got a couple of congressional seats that are very, very contested. So that's where our focus has to be in Ohio.
Do you care to share your short list with us of people?
No, but look, I served 12 years in the United States Senate, as you know. So I think I have some idea of what it takes.
What does it take? What will you?
Look, it takes someone who wants to work. I mean, it takes someone who it is not just about giving speeches, but someone who will do the nuts and bolts work and work for the state of Ohio and work for the United States, work for this country. So that's what I'm looking for. Look, it also has to be someone who can win a primary. It has to be someone who can win a general election. And it has to be someone who is willing to take on 2 races in a row. I'll point this person. They will run again in 2026. They'll run in 2028. That's tough. Nonstop campaigning for 4 years is not easy.
Vivek Ramaswamy says he is interested in the seat potentially. Is he someone who's on your list? Are you eyeing him?
We have a lot of good people, and as I've said, you know, I don't even have a. They asked me if I have a short list. I said, look, I don't even have a long list yet, so we'll get to that.
You'll get to that. You're
we'll
not quite there yet.
In time.
All right. Well, look, we're going to hear from Nikki Haley tonight, as well as Governor Ron DeSantis. What are you anticipating? Let me ask you about Nikki Haley specifically, because her voters could, quite frankly, be decisive in terms of who wins the White House in November. What will you be looking for in terms of her messaging to her voters and to the crowd here?
Well, look, conventions are where we get together. This is where Democrats get together. It's where Republicans get together. This is going to be a unity speech, I'm sure. I've not talked to her. And that's what it should be. That's what we expect at a convention like this. But again, you know, she took a different position in regard to Ukraine. She's taken a different position in regard to things on foreign policy. I would hope that she would not back away from that. But I don't expect her to come in here and start a fight with the president, with our nominee. Look, this is a time when we come together. We're Republicans. We're here. We want to go win this election.
All right. Governor Mike DeWine, thank you so
Good to be
much.
with you. Thank you.
Great to have you. We really appreciate your taking time for this conversation. Well, while former President Trump is here in Milwaukee, President Biden is out west in Las Vegas, where he's set to address the NAACP's national convention just moments from now. These will be his first comments in front of a large audience since Saturday's attempted assassination of former President Trump. In an exclusive interview with my colleague Lester Holt, the president said it was a mistake to tell donors in a private call last week that it was time to put Trump in a bullseye. But the president said he'd continue to criticize the former president on the trail. Take a listen.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies. Focus on the number of lies he told in the debate.
But have you taken a step back and done a little soul searching on things that you may have said that could incite people who are not balanced?
Well, I don't think, look, how do you talk about the threat to democracy, which is real, when a president says things like he says? Do you just not say anything because it may incite somebody? Look, I have not engaged in that rhetoric. Now, my opponent is engaged in that rhetoric.
NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli joins me now from Las Vegas. Mike, it is great to see you. So set the stage here. What are you anticipating? And I ask that within the context of President Biden delivering that address from the Oval Office, urging Americans to lower the temperature, and then during his interview with Lester Holt, making it clear he's still very much going to be drawing a contrast with former President Trump.
Yeah, that's right, Kristen. We really have seen two Bidens on display over the last 72 hours. Before the assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life, President Biden was in fighter mode. You saw that really boisterous rally he held in Detroit, where he had some of his most pointed language yet about Donald Trump as a felon, as a fraud, as somebody who was putting our democracy at risk, and then trying to, after the assassination attempt, go into the role of unifier, trying to speak to the country about the need to lower our political temperature. But then you're right. In that interview with Lester Holt, there was that fighter again, really pushing back on the continued questions about his mental acuity, on whether he should stay in this race. And so now we're in convention versus convention mode. It's not on the scale of what you're dealing with there in Milwaukee, but the president speaking to two very important constituencies over the next 2 days here in Las Vegas. Today it's the NAACP. Tomorrow, Unidos, a major Latino advocacy group. And what the Biden campaign is telling me is that the president really does want to get back to what was the message in Detroit, talking about what Donald Trump would lead to if he is in office again, a special focus, of course, on Project 2025 versus what President Biden would do in the first 100 days of his second term. They want it to be a policy contrast. They are very conscious of tone right now. They say it will be tonally different than what we saw in Detroit, but the substance still very much the same, Kristen.
Mike, we have less than a minute, but one of the big questions on everyone's mind is the debate within the Democratic Party over whether President Biden should stay at the top of the ticket. Do you feel like that has ended, or is it just that it is paused in the wake of this weekend's assassination attempt against former President Trump?
It may not be on pause, Kristen. It may be getting more organized. You see this effort on the part of some members of Congress, the Democratic caucus, to write this letter, to circulate it among their colleagues about whether to delay the process by which they were going to have this virtual roll call to affirm President Biden as the nominee of the party. This speaks to the fact that many of the more subtle efforts that have been underway on the part of Democratic elected officials to push the president potentially in the direction of stepping aside have not worked. And so now they're looking at every other tool at their disposal, Kristen.
All right, Mike Memoli, well, I know you continue to track every twist and turn, and we'll be listening very closely to President Biden when he speaks there in Las Vegas. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And still to come, we're counting down to the official kickoff for tonight's RNC events. Former Trump cabinet member Ben Carson, who's set to speak tonight in prime time, will be here with me. We'll get a preview of his speech. You're watching Meet the Press Now, special coverage of the Republican National Convention. Stay with us. Welcome back to NBC News Now coverage of the 2024 Republican National Convention. In just a few minutes, tonight's session will kick off with an evening themed around the border. Speakers will include Senate candidates, Republican House leadership, and some big names, including Republicans like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Trump's former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. Joining me now is someone else who served in the Trump administration and will be addressing the convention tonight, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Dr. Ben Carson. Secretary Carson, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
You. Thank you so much.
Before we look ahead to tonight, I want to ask you about last night, that extraordinary moment where former President Trump walked out onto the convention floor with a bandage on his ear, and it almost felt like there were religious overtones in that moment, including this notion, as some of the speakers said, that former President Trump had been spared or saved for this very moment. What was it like from your perspective to be there?
Well, it was clearly sort of a sense almost of a revival. People recognizing that there's a power greater than ourselves. And I think President Trump realizes that now, too. I mean, he's known it before, but it really comes home to you when you're that close to dying.
Well, you know, in the wake of that horrific assassination attempt, the former president has been very clear. He's rewriting his speech for Thursday night. He says he wants to deliver a message of unity. He wants to try to bring the country together. As you know, we find ourselves in a moment where there's a lot of political rhetoric that gets very heated. He has certainly, and he would not deny this, been a part of that. In one instance, calling for the execution of his former Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman. He's used very colorful rhetoric to talk about immigration and the border. Do you think it is possible for him to deliver a unifying message that reaches out to people beyond this convention?
Well, I think it's possible for all of us. You know, this is a very consequential election because it really is not about personalities and people. We need to just move that to the side and talk about what kind of country do we want to have? Do we want to have a country that is people-centric or one that is government-centric? And what were the original intents of the founders of this country? That's what we really need to be talking about and make a decision. We can go one way or the other, but let's be clear-eyed about which way we go.
Do you think the former president bears some responsibility for the climate, the political rhetoric that we see today?
Well, I think everybody bears responsibility for it. We just need to move beyond, you know, sort of what children do and move to a place where we have adults in the room who actually can sit down, put the facts in the middle of the table, and discuss the issues. And, you know, I've talked to President Trump recently. I think he actually realizes that. And I think you'll probably hear that in his speech.
So you have, based on your conversations with the former president, you're basically saying that he feels as though he's got to make a change overall, not beyond just his speech.
I think that he realizes, and I think that many of the people that I've spoken to realize that we need to move beyond personalities here, and we really need to get to the facts, because otherwise it's just a bunch of distraction.
Let me ask you about the other big news yesterday, which is that Donald Trump picked Senator JD Vance to be his running mate, 39 years old. He served less than 2 years in the U.S. Senate. You were one of the names that was getting a little bit of buzz. Any disappointment on your end that you're not on the ticket?
My only reason for being in the political arena going back 8 or 9 years is because I want to see our country do well. I want to see our children and our grandchildren have the same kind of opportunities that I've had. It's totally not about me. I don't care about me. I just care about what happens to our country. So I'm pleased that we have people who are willing to sacrifice. Certainly President Trump doesn't need all this stuff. And JD Vance is only beginning to feel the heat. You know, the way we do things, we just roast people without thinking about any other thing. And so he's going to have to face all of that. His wife and his children are going to have to face. It shouldn't be that way, but it is, unfortunately. And but I think he's well equipped to deal with it.
If there is a second Trump administration, would you want to be tapped to serve in it?
Well, I want to be tapped to help heal our country and to bring people together. And there's probably a series of different ways to do that, but I will definitely stay involved.
And we're going to hear from you tonight, just very briefly. We have about 10 seconds left. Quick preview of your speech.
Quick preview is I'm not sure what I'm going to say, but I will be inspired when I get there.
It's not written yet? Hey, that's a headline. Secretary Carson will listen very closely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Real pleasure to have you. Appreciate it very much. Well, I am back tomorrow live from Milwaukee on day 3 of the Republican National Convention. Special coverage continues with my friend and colleague, Hallie Jackson, who's sitting right next to me, Hallie, and I'll stick around for you.
What a handoff, Kristen Welker. That's what we call a smooth transition here in the business. Good to see.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.